get my 6. Which means for all of those of you who are new to the channel as of late and continually ask what's that even mean, it means watch behind me. Look back here. It's a clock. It's a military terminology. Directly in front of me is 12 o'clock. Directly behind me is 6. Watch back there and see if you see anyone or anything. Now, if you'll listen closely, you can hear the faint sounds of a leaf blower and the not so faint sounds of me drinking water, which I'm told I do loudly. I just finished running. Still got my running tights and everything on because it's in the 40s. I ran past that guy blowing leaves. He's almost a mile away from here. And his ears must have been turning because he stopped. So there's a couple of stories inside of this one. I'm going to get to the first one. Just a few days ago, I came on and I told a story. Actually, I read a story from Bigfoot Sasquatch Files, Volume 6, I believe it was, which is part of the collection of Anthology 1, available in Kindle and print from Amazon or with an autograph from our Etsy store. The link's in the description box below, as well as a really cool bookmark if you get it from Etsy. And this is a story called The Winds of November. And I spoke about how that first November when we spent in our house here 5-6 years ago now, the winds, how they whip up in November. They were doing it again just last night. They were banging the eaves. We had company, and we have an old friend, a very dear old friend, someone I've known longer than anybody in my life, came and spent the weekend with me, and she told me a very eerie story I'm going to pass on to you. But she was here along with her adult daughter, who I've been getting to know. She's okay, I guess. Kidding. I love this girl. She's a sweetheart. I just like to pick on her. So anyway, they were like, what's that? And I explained about the winds of November, the slamming of the eaves. And I got up and stepped away from the conversation at one point to go use the restroom. And I thought, man, I should go up there and look out those windows. Did I really see what I thought I saw all those years ago that I wrote about and that I read to people about? So I went upstairs and I looked out the window of the room that I use as my office. I peered out into the meadow behind the house, and there was just enough moonlight showing. The moon was full, but it was a very cloudy night. As you can see here, it's been overcast lately. They're actually potentially calling for snow this week. We might have snow on Thanksgiving, which I would welcome. I love snow. So I'm looking out the window, and there's just enough moonlight to almost see. I could see the features of the land. Couldn't pick out any details. And just at the foot of the path that leads up to our family campground, which is just above me here, I'm actually out in the woods just behind the campground, I could have sworn I saw a large, dark figure standing there, staring back at me. Now, I had not turned the bedroom light on in the room I was in, but I'd turned the upstairs hall light on. So there would have been enough light coming from the hallway into the room to show me, to make me visible to anybody who was outside looking in. So I stood there and I was staring at this large dark object, and my mind saying, oh my God, you got a Bigfoot Sasquatch, one of these guys right there on the night of a full moon. It's like it's that hat Timothy Howard and his wife and his 2 boys sent you. Thanks again for the hat. It's like right there. That's the scene in your backyard. And I came back to my senses and I thought, no, that's that black haw tree. Black haw. Give me a second. It's a deciduous tree. The leaves turn colors in the fall. They lose their leaves through the winter. The trees go dormant. Just before they do, they grow these beautiful little blackberry looking things. A century ago and before that, these were ground up and used for vaginal issues such as itching. Back before pharmaceutical companies existed, women loved it if they had black haw trees on their property. And we know this because we use an app to figure out what is everything on our property that we don't know, because we want to know what it all is. They're the last to lose their leaves. Right now, that black haw tree that I thought I was looking at last night down there at the beginning of that trail still has all its leaves. Actually, they lose their leaves just before the oak trees do, so they're one of the last. So I said, well, I'm just looking at that tree. That's all that is. And then that tree walked off through the meadow. And I was going like this, and I was like, okay, the clouds are moving in front of the moon. I'm seeing a shadow. And within just seconds, this thing was out of sight. So I looked back to where I thought I was staring at it or him or her or a black haw tree, and there was no large dark object there anymore. So I was thinking about that while I was running, getting ready to come out here after I was done and tell this story. And I thought, if there was something there that walked away through that meadow, it would have left tracks, and they would probably be pretty big. And when I got to that point, I recorded it. This is what I saw. It's time for you to have a look. Check this out. So way down there's the house. I'm going to zoom in for you. This is the upstairs window from where I had my vantage point. The creature was standing here. It stared back at me for a full minute before stepping into the meadow, leaving behind these very large tracks, as you can tell. Okay, I wear a size 12 shoe, just went for a run. And whatever left these tracks had bigger feet than me. A man, look at that, it's almost twice as big. There's the top. A man who wears size 12 shoes. And it continued to walk off through the meadow and into the forest. The forest into which we will now go into to continue this story. Those were not deer tracks. Those were not bear tracks. What kind of tracks they were? Who knows? So now let's get on to the story I'm going to relay to you by way of my old friend last night as she related to me. It is about a set of tracks, but it's actually about a second set of tracks that makes this story super creepy. What, brah? Said it right there in the title. What were you expecting? People say, your stories aren't anything about what the title says. Have you listened to the whole video yet, brah? So, anywho, I was talking to my old friend last night, and she told me, she says, I can share a story with you, something that happened just this year, recently, with a man that she taught with for over 20 years. My friend's a teacher. She's been doing it for a long time. And she said it's a sad story, but it's also kind of creepy. You should hear me out, and then you make the decision whether or not you want to share it on your channel. I heard her out, and here I am sharing the story, and I think you'll agree it's very shareable worthy. If that's a term. If not, I've just invented another term. So she met this coworker of hers where she used to teach. She's been like many teachers, it's been teaching 20 plus years. She's been in several different schools. But she liked this guy so much she stayed in contact with him. They stayed friends, and they're in the same county. And this is back in West by God, Virginia. And her and she's got this little clique, I guess. Most of them work at her school, but some of them are teachers that she's worked with from other schools, but they've all stayed in touch. This one man, we will call him Johnny. It's very fitting for this story. He was a lifelong bachelor. He died this past year. He was in his late 60s from heart attack. I mean, there's a spoiler. He's dead. He died of a heart attack. It wasn't COVID. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't, mysterious disappearance in a national forest. He had a heart attack. But it's the circumstances leading up to that heart attack that makes the story super creepy, especially when you hear about the second set of tracks. So the man had been a lifelong bachelor. So when she met him, he would have been like in his early 40s. She said he was an average to above average looking guy. He wasn't like all buff or fit. He was a little bit doughy because he just never really cared to do any sort of physical activity. But he wasn't even fat, let alone obese. He was just, somebody who wasn't in shape. But other than that, he seemed to be relatively healthy. And my friend told me that her assumption at first was, well, he's gay. And a lot of people assume that, right? When they see men or women in their middle years who had never been married, never have kids, people are, okay, I know what's going on. No, that wasn't the case. The man was not gay. But he didn't date women. He appeared to be, and this is a term, I guess when I was researching my book, The Lunatic, to try to figure out what specifically was the issue behind the main character of the lunatic who was bat crap insane. I discovered something called asexuality. There are asexuals among us in our society. It's not like an earthworm or a sponge that can reproduce on its own without a partner. They are people who simply are not physically and especially sexually attracted to either gender. If they're women, they're not turned on by men, they're not turned on by other women, they're just like asexual. Men, they're not attracted to women, they're not into other men, they're just not attracted to other people. And I actually read a little bit in depth because I thought, is the lunatic an asexual? Well, it wasn't. He was something else. He was pansexual, which you got to read the book to find out what that means if you don't know what it is. This was the case with little Johnny. And so he didn't want to do any women the disservice of getting involved with them, getting into a committed relationship with them, of course, hoping it was going to go somewhere that he knew it was not going to go. Marriage, children, all these things. So he stayed a lifelong bachelor. Now, mind you, he was teaching in West Virginia, and so he had to deal with a lot of those, he must be this, he must be that. But he had this special way of, when it came from students especially, or students' parents, instead of being defensive, instead of jading, justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining why he lived the way he did, he didn't do it. He just showed him more acceptance. He showed him more love. And by the end of every school year, some of those students or the students' parents who wanted to hate him for being something that he wasn't, that they thought he was, which they certainly shouldn't have hated anybody for anyway, these became his favorite students, and he became, in their eyes, their favorite teacher. He just had a way with people. Everybody liked the guy. He's very amiable. People who took the time to get to know him. Well, my friend in time would come to understand why it was that he was a lifelong bachelor. And it wasn't so much because he was asexual. It was because of a tragedy in his life that happened when he was 7 years old. Basically, there were 5 children. He had 4 siblings. There was 3 older sisters. Then there was him, little Johnny, and then he had a baby brother. So their father was a coal miner. They spent some time living in the southern coal fields of southern West by God, Virginia. And they were in a community for a short time, less than 2 years, because as it would be, that coal mine dried up, they mined it out, closed it down, laid everybody off. A lot of folks laid around waiting on the mines to call them back to go back to work. If they're still alive, they're still sitting there waiting for that call that never came and never will. Well, little Johnny's dad said, hey, they're not calling back. It's how it works. We're mobile. We're getting out of here. They moved to the next town that had open mines, and his father worked actively in the coal mines until he retired. So Johnny had that work ethic put before him. He saw a man's duty is to work and take care of his family. Well, of course, Johnny never had a family, but he worked until he retired after 30-some years of teaching. So they left this community shortly after this tragedy happened. But here's the tragedy that happened while they were there. Many of you maybe are not familiar with coal mining territory. If you go to, they do a lot of mountaintop removal now, where they'll just tear the entire mountaintop off of a mountain and then take the mine, or take the coal that's in the mine. Well, back then, they would tunnel, they would dig, they would blast, they would send rail carts down 200 feet underground. Well, one of the results of that, of bringing all that coal out, is they would create all these big silt piles or shale piles. and they could be dangerous. Most people would stay away from them, but kids being kids would play in them. You know, I remember growing up as a teenager, I had a dirt bike, a DR 125 Suzuki, and all my buddies had dirt bikes or four-wheelers. We would go ride on those things. And some that were very stable, we would make trails on. We called them the gob piles, right into the gob piles. A lot of folks refer to it as gob. Well, little Johnny was 7 and his baby brother was 5. And they were out one day. They were running around playing tag, as they always did, the kids, the sisters as well. And Johnny and his little brother were running up a gob pile, and the pile gave, and it avalanched, and it buried Johnny's 5-year-old brother. Johnny, he dug, he tried to find him, couldn't find him. Could you imagine 7 years old and this happens to your 5-year-old brother? Well, Johnny's parents, I guess, took it upon themselves to blame him for life because that happened. And I couldn't imagine the trauma that would cause for a 7-year-old child in the first place. And then for the next 11 to 12 years, basically to have your parents dump that on you to make you feel even worse. That was Johnny's story. So when he got out of high school, he went off to college and he never went back. He became estranged from his family, had nothing to do with them. And again, that's why he never married. That's why he never had kids. But he kind of viewed it as if his students were his kids, and he did a great job teaching, changed a lot of people's lives for the better. Well, there in his final year or so of teaching, my friend who was telling me the story, she and the friends in that clique were starting to worry about Johnny because he would just start telling them these fantastic stories about the dreams he was beginning to have at night and how they seemed so surreal. And it was his little brother, it was his sisters, who, by the way, have all since passed. They were all gone. And so he never had that opportunity to go back and reconnect with the family he walked away from because of the guilt shaming from the parents. He kind of took the attitude F1, F all, and estranged himself from all of them. So he said he would have the dreams that were so vivid, he would be awakened in the middle of the night at the sound of his sisters as children, little girls, or his little brother before he was dead, saying, "Hey, Johnny, come play with us." They used to run all over those hills, chase each other up the slate piles, play tag, catch tadpoles in the creek, just typical childhood life growing up in the country. And my friend, who was also his friend and the little clique of friends, they suggested he go see a therapist, go see somebody, because they thought maybe he was getting dementia, early dementia. So he did. And the therapist suggested that what he might need is closure. He couldn't have it now by reconnecting with people who are no longer living. So the therapist suggested he go seek out this town in the coal fields of southern West by God, Virginia, and just walk down Main Street, maybe even go back and see the old house. So he did. After he retired, that was his last year teaching. That summer he went back, found the old place. The place is basically like a ghost town with a very small population, a lot of whom have issues with opioids and whatnot. It's a very sad state of much of Appalachistan right now, whether it's West by God, Virginia, Kentucky, parts of Ohio, Southwest Virginia, south of Roanoke. So anyway, he went to the old house. It was boarded up, dilapidated. He was standing there looking at it. He said memories came back to his mind that were so vivid that, again, he thought he heard his 3 sisters and brother yelling out for him, "Johnny, Johnny, here we are, come and find us, chase us." He looked up and he saw movement out of the corner of his eyes, and it appeared as if it was like a little girl running around the side of the house. So he goes around the side of the house and he looks, there's nobody there, there's nothing there, and the yard goes out to where it enters a very steep slope, which still had old slate piles on it, that led up into a flat part, which looks like a field up on top, and then, of course, into the woods. So he looks, he doesn't see anybody, he doesn't see this girl that he heard and that he thought he saw, and there were no footprints whatsoever. So Johnny goes back to where he lives, and my friend and their little clique get together with him. They said, well, what was that like going back, seeing the town, seeing the house? Do you have closure? Did you come to closure? And he said, well, kinda. And they were like, uh-oh, what's this mean? And he told him, he says, I bought the house. He says, I went in and I found out, how to do so. Actually, he got it for a song for back taxes that were never paid on it. And you can do this. You go to the courthouse and somebody has $800 worth of back taxes that they had their home repoed for because they didn't pay it. You can buy that property for $800 just by selling those back taxes. A lot of those properties you wouldn't want, and that's why they're all over the place. But he wanted that one because it had been his childhood home for about 2 years. And he wanted to fix it up, and he did. And so the summer after he retired, and he hired some help, they cleared the weeds, fixed up the house to make it at least livable in. And but my friend, who was telling me this story this weekend as she was here with her daughter, who's okay, I guess. Nah, she's a good young person. They would start to go spend weekends with him because they were concerned. They would send somebody because they thought he was clearly losing his mind. So one weekend, my friend couldn't go. She had to send someone else, and she sent another woman, one of their friends, who had been friends with Johnny, to spend the weekend with him. And this is the weekend that he died. It was Saturday afternoon, and the lady who had gone to stay with him laid down in the guest room to take a nap. She wanted to take a nap. And she was awakened to the sound of Johnny saying, just wait, I'll be right there. Just wait, I'll be right there. And she hears Johnny boom, 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 running out of the house. She jumps up out of the bed. She's like, Johnny, where are you going? What are you doing? And she explicitly heard the voice of a little boy yelling, you can't catch me. So her first instinct was, there's some kids here messing with this guy. So she runs back to the window and she looks out and she sees Johnny, a man in his late 60s who was a little doughy, not fat, but a little doughy, certainly didn't exercise, didn't work out, wasn't very fit, sprinting up the side of a slate pile on his toes. And for a brief second, she saw what appeared to be a little boy going over the top of the hill. She took off running out of the house, went outside, ran through the yard, got to that slate pile, looked up, saw that Johnny was not within sight. She started to go up the pile and got scared and realized that thing was probably going to avalanche on her. So she walked up the hill where there was terrain like this, trees, leaves, roots. It was steep, but there was no slate, nothing that was dangerous. She got to the top of the hill. She looked over and there was a field there and there was a picket fence. And inside that picket fence, one of the sides of the fence had dilapidated, rotted, fallen down. Her friend John was in there laying face down. She ran to him as quickly as she could, being exhausted, cream crackered, as our buddies in England would say, having come up that hill. He was laying there. He looked to be dead. She said his name, shook him, no response. She felt for a pulse, no pulse. The part she didn't know, and the part my friend didn't know, what nobody knew is that his baby brother had been buried at the top of that hill. It was the only grave there. And when the woman looked, she noticed that not just Johnny was laying there, but there was a second set of tracks that had, when she went and looked back, she saw had gone up that gob pile, had gone into that grave and ended on that grave. Right there. Those tracks stopped. It was as if they were made by a child who had just vanished at the spot of the grave. The coroner would rule the death as a result of a heart attack. The man simply had a heart attack from not being very fit, being 68 years old, and sprinting up the side of that hill. My friend who told me the story said that she and her other friends feel that Johnny's exactly where he needs to be, and they feel he's had his closure. Hope you enjoyed this story. Be back for more next time.